Okay, gute Woche, freiliche Woche. Okay, so we just read today Parshas Parah, and Parshas Parah talks about the the mitzvah which is beyond logic and reason, the mitzvah of the red heifer. And one of the aspects of the mitzvah of the red heifer, and why it's considered beyond logic and reason, is because on the one hand, if you if you are involved in the creation of the red heifer, if you're involved in the creation of the red heifer, you will become impure, versus the person that you sprinkled the ashes upon, that person would become pure. And the Torah says about this mitzvah, this is the law of the Torah. Not just it's a law of the Torah, this is the law of the Torah. The question is, why is this called the law of the Torah? It's a law of the Torah, yes, but it's not the only law. If someone were to ask you to describe Judaism, you were to talk for 3 days until you're blue in the face, you probably wouldn't ever discuss the red heifer. Yet the Torah says this is the law of the Torah. And one of the explanations for this is that the essence of Torah is to go beyond your ego. So giving in a way that challenges you, giving in a way that maybe hurts sometimes, and going beyond your ego and giving up yourself in that way, in a way that you're becoming impure, which means not only a ritual impurity, but it means that you're giving of yourself in a way that matters to you, to help someone else become pure, which doesn't only mean to help them become pure, but to give to another person in a way that helps them. When you give of yourself to help someone else in a way that's hard for you, this is the essence of Torah, because the essence of Torah is about going beyond the eye, going beyond the ego, getting closer to the essence of who you are, the soul, which doesn't have an ego. So on that note, I wanted to share with you a story about a very prominent chassid in Chabad. He has many names: Yaakov, Zachariah, Smolenik, and all of them have many syllables, making it harder to pronounce his name. Yaakov Maskalik, Yaakov Zaravutcher, Yaakov Bob. His last name was Maskalik, and he became the Rav of Zaravutcher, as I'll share in a moment. But he was also called other names. He was called the mother of the yeshiva students. The Rebbe Rashab called him the Beditchever. The Rebbe Levitz Beditchever is famous for his efforts to help the Jewish people, not just help the Jewish people physically and spiritually, but to help us in the eyes of God. The previous Rebbe said about him that he created a new chamber in heaven, which is basically like a chamber that's bent on discovering the merit of the Jewish people. So he, in his way, embodied this tzaddik, his behavior, to the extent that the Rebbe Rashab called him by that name, and the Rebbeim didn't give out compliments like that just freely. This was something unique about this man. He was like a Levitz Berditchev. So there's a lot to say about this man. Among Hasidim, he's more than just a man. He's more like a concept. The Rebbe Yaakov Zachariah Maskalik is not just a man with a story. He's more like, if you study Hasidus, you study concepts called Toyu and Tikkun and Atzilus. Yaakov Zachariah Maskalik is one of those people which is like a concept in Hasidus. So I don't want to go through this whole concept so quickly. So I'll share some of it tonight, and God willing, next week we'll continue discussing Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah Maskalik, Yaakov of Zaravutcher. Yaakov Zachariah was born in a city called Shadrin in Russia, and his family was from Koidenov. And the city of Shadrin was built by the Tzemach Tzedek, by the third Rebbe of Chabad, and the majority of the people living in the city were Chabad Hasidim. Although he came from Koidenov, he didn't come from Chabad stock, but when he turned 15, he had heard about the yeshiva of Tomchei Tmimim. He heard about the yeshiva that the Rebbe Rashab had made. He heard how special it was. And he decided this yeshiva was a good place for him. And he wanted to go to the yeshiva, and his parents seeing how dedicated he was in the service of Hashem, they thought that this might be a good idea. And he came to the yeshiva, and there was another 40 boys trying to get in. It was very competitive to try and get into this yeshiva. And he was chosen in the month of Cheshvan in 5661 in Tafresh Samach Aleph. He joined the yeshiva. He studied in the yeshiva for 8 years. But again, besides being so diligent in his studies, he was called as Rabbi Khan, the one who would always memorize his talks every week, and he would write them down and repeat them. His father, Rabbi Khan, knew this Rabbi Yaakov Zaravutcher, and he said about him, we all called him Mam. We called him Mama, called him Mother, because, for example, many of the boys would come to the yeshiva, and they wouldn't have beds. They would have blankets from home, but they wouldn't have beds. They wouldn't have mattresses. So he would himself take these straw sacks, and he would sew himself mattresses, pillows by himself for these poor boys who came without mattresses, without pillows. He was also the nurse of the yeshiva. Anyone had any problem, they would go to him. So Yaakov remained in this yeshiva in Chabad in Lubavitch for 8 years until his wedding. He got married to the daughter of Tuvia Margolin in Zlobin. And right after he got married, the Rebbe Rashab instructed him that he should study to become a rabbi. He should get smicha. And the Rebbe Rashab had one chassid, more than one perhaps, but one of the chassidim was more famous as a rabbi that was entrusted with guiding younger rabbis to become rabbis, was Rav Nachman Mendel Chaim. And so people would come to Nachman Mendel Chaim, and he would introduce the younger rabbis to the rabbinate. They would stay with him, and they would learn how he answered questions. So Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah Miskalnik, he went to by the Rebbe Rashab's instructions. He went to Rav Mendel of Niezhin, and he learned there how to become a rabbi. And while he was living there in Zlobin, his wife gave birth to 2 daughters. And it's possible that it was by the Rebbe Rashab's instructions, we don't really know, but the rabbi in his hometown passed away. And there was some question about whether he should become the rabbi there or not. There was a Ashkenazic shul, and they wanted their rabbi to become the new rabbi of the city, Rabbi Baruch Rabinovich. He was rabbi of the Ashkenazic shul in Zaravutcher. And Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah Maskalnik, either by their Rebbe Rashab's instructions or not, he arrived after the rabbi passed away. He arrived there to contend for the position. And again, he was such a simple, pure-hearted person that he and his speeches were so illuminating and inspiring that there was no question that he was chosen to be the rabbi. But the detractors didn't like that, and they realized how pure-hearted and how good he was, and they decided to use that to his disadvantage. And they told him, you were chosen in the month of Av, 3 months after he arrived. He was staying at the home of Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson's father, Yaakov Jacobson's home, until he was chosen as a rabbi. And some of the townspeople came over to him and said, you were chosen as a rabbi fair and square, but I want you to know, they told him, that the guy who was contending for the position against you, Rabbi Baruch Rabinovich, he has no income. It wasn't really true. But they knew how pure-hearted this guy was. They knew that this would mean something to him. They said to him, you took away this guy's livelihood. And he didn't want to have anything to do with anything that whispered of argument of certainly not jeopardizing another person's income. So they brought him a document. They asked him to sign and commit to give 400 ruble every month to the family of Rabbi Baruch Rabinovich, to give to him 400 rubles. Now his income was barely that. So he was basically signing off all of his income and perhaps more to Rabbi Baruch Rabinovich. And he signed it immediately. But the people in the town realized, this guy was taken advantage of. These people just made the story up, and he signed, and he's in trouble now. And now what do we do? So they told the Rebbe Rashab about it. The Rebbe Rashab sent a chassid, Reb Zalman Havlin, to Zaravutcher to try to figure things out. Rab Zalman was sort of like a Kissinger. By the way, the Rebbe once said to Rabbi Chaim Gutnikol V'Shalom that he needs a Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was unique. He was a great statesman for America, and he was a very great diplomat. So Rabbi Zalman Havlin was a similar character. He was able to talk to even his detractors and inspire them and convince them and connect with them. He was very, very gifted. And he basically got everyone to agree to void the contract he had made, committing himself to give this exorbitant amount of money that he didn't have. So, but he was very beloved by the townspeople. There was, yes, an argument in the beginning, but the entire town loved him. And when he became the rabbi of this town, a lot of things changed. The town became filled with the spirit of Lubavitch, of Hasidus. Among other things, people started sending their children to the yeshiva of Lubavitch. The mikveh was warm. He, as opposed to other opinions, the Alter Rebbe maintains that a mikveh is allowed to be warmed on Shabbos, and the mikveh started becoming warmer, and not only mikveh, but the whole town became a warmer town thanks to this Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah. Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah, he didn't approach people with hello, how are you? He approached people with a very great warmth. He would say to someone when he saw them, Tzaddik, how are you? Chassidul, how are you? You chassid, you tzaddik, how are you? That's how he approached people. And he didn't just say it like externally, superficially. He said it with such a warmth, and people, anyone who had something going on in their life that weighed on their shoulders, they went to him because he was so loving and so caring. His position changed drastically when World War I began and the Bolsheviks took over the country of Russia, and when the Bolshevik Revolution began, so all of the rabbis became the enemies of the state, and you needed to teach your children underground after the Bolsheviks came into power. Interesting, when Trotsky came to power, the previous Rebbe said about Trotsky that Hashem made the world in a way that that the forces of good are equal to the forces of the opposite of good. And he said, since the creation of the world, there hasn't been such a thick klipa, such a consumed of godliness like Trotsky. And the previous Rebbe said that Hashem made the world in a way that holiness has commensurate to the opposite of holiness. And so, but we don't have to spell out who he is, meaning who is the holy person that is equal to the evil of Trotsky. We don't have to spell out who he is, but the previous Rebbe mentioned that he wears torn slippers. Interesting. This Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah, he was one of the few people that was always with the previous Rebbe's mission, and sometimes for serving as his personal secretary, as we'll discuss. But when the previous Rebbe said this, he was staying in a hotel, and the only one, when you were associated with the previous Rebbe, you were associated with being counter-revolutionary. So it was very dangerous to have anything to do with the previous Rebbe. But this Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah, he was at that time serving as previous Rebbe secretary. After the previous Rebbe was released from prison, he wanted to move back to Leningrad. He wasn't allowed to stay in Leningrad, so he moved to a suburb of Moscow called Malachovka. And when he was there, this Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah was his personal secretary. So he said that in the hotel where the previous Rebbe was staying, he was the only one allowed to stay there. He saw the previous Rebbe had torn slippers. So he mentioned there's some with torn slippers. So he actually saw the previous Rebbe. Everyone knew what the previous Rebbe meant, but he actually saw the previous Rebbe's torn slippers. So that's what happened after World War I, when things became very difficult in Soviet Russia. So Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah Maskalnik's job changed completely. Instead of him being the rabbi who has to answer questions about chickens, he had to now bring Torah underground. So he was a very devoted chassid of the Rebbe Rashab, but his main service of working underground began when the previous Rebbe became Rebbe. And so he unfortunately suffered a lot himself. Besides his actual activities, and so under the previous Rebbe's guidance, we had to leave his children in the care of a friend of his. He had to leave his children in the care of Reb Chaim Eliezer Gorelik because of the previous Rebbe entrusted him with traveling around. And we have to understand that it's not the previous Rebbe told him to leave his family, and there was a time when thousands of children were roaming the streets and going to these Soviet schools and cutting themselves off from Judaism forever. And the previous Rebbe was fighting a war to save all these children throughout Soviet Russia. So this Rebbe Yaakov Zachariah, he traveled around from city to city under the guidance of the previous Rebbe, and he couldn't take care of his children. He himself suffered tremendously. His daughter, Riva, died when she was 3. His wife got pneumonia shortly afterwards, and with all the doctors' efforts, they couldn't heal her. And so when Rabbi Yaakov was a rabbi there in Zaravutcher, he had another 3 boys. So he was left taking care of his 4 orphans by himself, without a wife. And so when the enormous burden that the previous had put on his shoulders was growing and growing, he really couldn't take care of his children himself, and therefore he had to send them to study by his friend Rabbi Gorelik. It's hard for us to imagine that, but that's a reality. That was what was called for. Let me just say this: the previous Rebbe said about this Yaakov Zechariah Skalnik. He said about him that if I had 20 Yankelach, if I had 20 like Yankel, I could turn over the entire Russia. If I had 20 people like him, that's how incredibly devoted and gifted he was. There was one Shmini Atzeres that Reb Simcha Gordetsky was also one of the previous Rebbe's emissaries in Soviet Russia. Simcha Gordetsky said there was one Shmini Atzeres, one Simchas Torah, and there was a Farbrengen, there was a Hasidic gathering with the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe was leading this gathering, and Rabbi Yaakov was dancing with the children outside in the courtyard. And the singing was so loud that it was disturbing the gathering. So Itcha the Masmid was someone who actually had the merit of meeting someone who hosted him for a long time, Rabbi Greenberg, Al Shalom, the Rosh Hashiva in Morristown, New Jersey. He told me about Rabbi Itcha the Masmid and his Seder Hayom, his daily schedule. Unbelievable, this person. He served Hashem literally 24 hours a day, and that's why he was called the Masmid, the diligent one. So he was considered one of the top Hasidim of the previous Rebbe. So this Simchas Torah, there's a Farbrengen, you have the all-star Hasidim, Rabbi Itcha the Masmid. Rabbi Itcha the Masmid, someone he was the kind of guy who would put his feet into cold water at night to help enable him to keep on studying. And so Rabbi Itcha was disturbed by the sound of the children. And he said, it's disturbing. And then he said it a second time. And the previous Rebbe made a remark. The remark was that when you reach the truth, the word truth has 3 letters. When you reach the top of the aleph of the first letter of truth, emes, when you reach the top of the aleph of truth, then you could sense that this is also truth. Parenthetically, the previous Rebbe at that time wanted all of his Hasidim to be involved in teaching Torah on the ground. Rabbi Itcha the Masmid had a hard time with this because his service of Hashem was a whole different way. His service of Hashem was with prayer and with study, and that's how he spent his whole life. So the previous Rebbe once told him, Itcha, ey, du tust n Tashbar, bist du meine. Ob du tust nicht n Tashbar, bist du take Itcha, bist nicht meine. Itcha, if you're involved in Tashbar means in teaching Torah to children on the ground, then you're mine. If you're not involved in teaching Torah to children on the ground, you may be Itcha, but you're not mine. You're missing that connection. There's something different that you're losing if you're not going to be part of this effort. So anyways, this Farbrengen, that's what the previous Rebbe said, that if you reach the top of the aleph, you can sense the truth in Rabbi Yaakov dancing with the children of Simchas Torah. Then later on, the Farbrengen, interesting, Rabbi Itcha asked something else of the previous Rebbe. The one who shared the story, Rabbi Simcha couldn't hear what he asked, but the previous Rebbe remarked the following when he asked his second question, this request, blessing. The previous Rebbe said, you're asking for high levels. You're asking for things that are really high up. Let me tell you something, the previous Rebbe said. In heaven, there are many levels of angels, higher and higher levels of angels. But he said, at night, the office is closed. In order to connect with these angels, basically, they're busy. The office is closed. You can't reach them at night. However, says the previous Rebbe, when Rabbi Yaakov gets up in the morning and he washes his hands, and he says the morning blessings, then then the angels sing along with him. Then the angels already are awake and the angels can join. But at night, the angels are not there. The office is closed. They can't do anything without Rabbi Yaakov saying his morning blessings. The previous Rebbe said. So his term as the rabbi in this city basically completely changed now with him traveling from city to city throughout Soviet Russia. The previous Rebbe left Russia in 5688, and right before he left Simchas Torah, there was a tremendous gathering of Hasidim to be with the previous Rebbe Malka. They knew this was his last Simchas Torah with them. They knew he would leave to America soon. They knew they may never see him again. So when they were, though it was Simchas Torah, a day of dancing with the Torah, but the energy, the feeling of everyone was very bitter. This is the last time we'll see the Rebbe. So they were in the synagogue, waiting for the previous Rebbe to enter. And Rabbi Yaakov did something that remained in the hearts and minds of those who witnessed this scene. There wasn't time to sing yet. The Yaakov didn't begin. So he took the children and started to dance with them. He told, don't sing, but repeat these words with me. The words were, Kinder halt sich, children, hold on. Children, hold on. And again. They're dancing. Children, hold on. They're saying again and again. Children, oh, Kinder halt sich, Kinder halt sich. It was a brilliant move. It really restored to all the Hasidim present this determination to hold on. Yes, the previous Rebbe is going to America, but as the previous Rebbe said when he came to America, before he left, he said, it's not a yam mafsik, it's yam mechaber. It's not an ocean that separates us, it's an ocean that connects us. That's what the previous Rebbe said. It's not an ocean that separates, it's an ocean that connects. The Rebbe actually mentioned this remark of the previous Rebbe, and he said that just like the previous Rebbe said this about his departure to America, that although on the surface it looked like he was forced to leave, but really whatever happens to a tzaddik is by the tzaddik's agreement to whatever it is. So his departure to America didn't mean a separation from the Hasidim, and he continued to guide them and to bless them and to hear from them. There's actually one Chassid who arrived in America after the previous Rebbe came to America, after World War II, and the previous Rebbe asked him, why didn't you ask me for a blessing while you're going through whatever you're going through? He said, what do you mean? How could I ask you for a blessing? I was in Soviet Russia. There's no way to send a letter to America, letter to get from back from America to it's impossible. So the previous Rebbe said you could have just said the words, Rebbe, help. So the interruption, separation physically between the Rebbe and in Russia and the Hasidim, the Rebbe in America and the Hasidim in Russia didn't mean a separation. In a similar way, the Rebbe said also about the previous Rebbe's passing, that his passing doesn't mean a separation. Just like his departure to America didn't mean he was separated from the Hasidim, so too his Bal Korchach Atachai, so too his departure from this world physically didn't mean a separation. So this Rabbi Yaakov Zacharias Maskalik, he embodied this connection. So I'll share one more anecdote about Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah. God willing, next week we'll continue talking about him. Rabbi Yaakov Zachariah, he would travel around like a beggar. He would wear torn clothing. He was very, very gifted with his oratory skills. And what his goal was to, he pretended that he couldn't afford to live, and he was traveling around to speak, and people pay him for his speeches. That's what he pretended to do. But he didn't care about, that was just a cover for the KGB. He would travel to meet children, to meet people, and to talk to them about sending their children to study Torah. So he said that a very interesting thing. He said among the missions he has in the previous Rebbe, he met one chassid. His name was Rabbi Yeshua Zelig Diskin from Volin, he met him in Volin. Rabbi Shua this Zelig Diskin, he met him in Volin, and he told Rabbi Shua Zelig that he travels around from city to city to inspire people to send their children to study Torah, and also, interesting, to establish that in synagogues between Mincha and Ma'ariv, they should study Mishnayos, they should study Ein Yaakov, they should study Mishnah, and they should study the sections of Torah that the stories of the Talmud. And that was so important that was part of the mission the previous entrusted him with, to travel from city to city. He told this to Yeshua Zelig, this is the 42nd city. He's arrived in Volin, and he came to, he met this Yeshua Zelig also later on in the next city, Shpetekovke. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. Either way, the point is, he's his 42nd city traveling around, and no one can know who he was. Sometimes the rabbis in the town didn't know who he was because he couldn't trust anybody unless he knew. And he would try to find people to join this mission, and to also bring children to bring children to study Torah. So this is the purity that we're reading about today about the red heifer. Of giving of yourself to help others, and that's how you become who you need to be. This man, the Rebbe Rashab said about him, the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, that's who he was. He embodied Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. That's not a light statement. How did he get there? He gave himself to help others. That's how he reached the purity of spirit, the essence of his soul, and that's how we reach the coming of Mashiach. Because the red heifer is not just a way to purify yourself from impurity. Impurity came to the world as a result of the sin of the tree of knowledge. The sin of the tree of knowledge brought impurity to the world. It brought death to the world. So the red heifer, which brings purity from the sin, purity from death, also serves as an antidote for the sin of the tree of knowledge. So that's the golden road towards the coming Mashiach. To give of ourselves to help others, as we see that our Rebbe does the same and sends emissaries all over the world, and each of us is an emissary of the Rebbe, and we're meant to give of ourselves to help others, and that's how we will discover who we are ourselves. L'chaim, l'chaim, a gute Woche, and a freiliche Woche, gebenchte Woche. Chaim echol David, chaim Rav David, chaim Rav Berel, chaim Ben Chayil, chaim Rav David, l'chaim.